Good day, everybody, and welcome back to another visual effects demo. Today, we're going to be talking about the three sort of essential techniques for visual effects and mesh-based visual effects. We're talking about panning, distortion, and erosion. So in this tutorial, I'm going to show you guys how to execute these techniques, as well as introduce you to the next task for our class, which is the portal task. The objective of which is to create a portal effect that uses some mesh-based visual effects or particles. So with that, let's begin to show you guys how to create this effect that you see on screen right now from scratch. So to start, I'm going to create a emissive panner, a master material for my emissive panner. So, and then I'm going to assign this here just to show you what it looks like as I work. So as usual, when we're working with our master materials, we're going to have to set them to translucent and then unlit, just so we can get the emissive and opacity plugs. And then now we can start working. So for this effect, we are going to start with a noise texture. And noise textures are just patterns, right? So the idea for this effect is kind of utilizing or taking advantage of the fact that we are going to be using seamless tiling textures. So we can take these textures and kind of tile them against each other, and they will always match on either side, on any side that you can kind of put them on. So to illustrate this, we can just go ahead and put this into our material here. And if I hit apply, then you can see that the noise is going to wrap around my mesh, like so. And it's important to know that, or it's important to know how your UV orientations are set up whenever you're working with mesh particles, just because that is going to dictate which direction your noise is going to tile. Like, so for example, this cylinder mesh, it has a more basic kind of UV orientation, wherein the U or the x-axis is moving horizontally, right? It's going to wrap around the cylinder, and the V or the y-axis is just going to move up and down. So it's going to tile from the bottom to the top. Whereas in this disk mesh that we have, you're going to have some, it's a little bit more complex in terms of the setup, whereas the U coordinate or the x-axis is actually spinning around the disk, whereas the V coordinate is going from the innermost part of the disk to the outermost edge of the disk. So it's going to move from the inside to the outside if we tile it along the y-axis. So now we're going to move on to tiling and panning. So with that, the first thing we are going to do is to have a texture coordinate node. There you go. And what this does is it just, like I said before, is it takes the UV coordinates of the mesh and tells your texture how to wrap around it. And in this instance, we are going to do what is called UV offsetting, which means we are going to add an offset to this function to be able to move our texture around. So to be able to do that, typically you would have an add node, and then you would have like two vectors, right? Or like a two floats, two numbers So you could do like maybe like offset X or offset Y, right? So you could have two of these. Stick them into an append. This is append vector. And then plug that into add, plug this into UV, and hit apply. And then what you will notice is that if I start moving my Y, right? So this is kind of the effect that we want to do, is to add an offset, right? But the problem here is that this is completely static, so we would need like a time node to be able to, we would have to multiply this by time to be able to animate this like perpetually in a looping manner, right? So if I hit apply, then that would, now we're panning, right? So this is essentially a panning texture now, whereas we will have an offset that is multiplied by time. And so now we just have like it's almost like a speed multiplier when it comes to panning. And so this is like a broken down form of what we want to do. Obviously this has a lot of nodes already in there, so this could get pretty complicated pretty quickly, and ultimately this is going to get a little bit more messy. So let's try a different approach to this particular technique. So I'm going to delete this, and I'm just going to use something that Unreal Engine already has, which is the panner node. So this node has all of the nodes that we just did already inside of this, because this is a function, right? So this function allows us to pan our textures using a time multiplier, just like we did before, but now it's just a little bit cleaner. So all we have to do is plug the texture coordinate into the coordinate input, plug the panner into UV, like so. And then for this one, we're going to use a constant vector 4. We're going to use a constant vector 4 in order to do two things at the same time. We want to be able to control the tiling of our texture coordinate so that we can control how small the details are or how big the details are. And then we want to be able to control the speed of which we are panning the texture. And with the constant vector 4, we will be able to do that. So first of all, I will right click this and then convert this to parameter and just name it to something like texture main. In this texture sample, I will also convert to parameter. Just do texture main. And then I will rename, once again, on my constant vector 4, I will rename my channels. So red channel, I will rename to tile X. Green channel, I will rename to tile Y. Blue channel will rename to speed X. And then alpha channel will rename to speed Y. So speed X and Y. Tile X and Y, speed X and Y. And then we'll do appends. Append vector once again. We'll do 2 of them. And then the tiling will append together. So tile goes to the same append. And then the speed will append together. So the speeds will go to the same append. To create tiling, we'll do multiply on the text coordinate. So on this texture coordinate, just plug this into A. Tiling X, plug this into B. And then coordinate, the multiply will go into the panner's coordinate input. Like so. And then the speed will just go straight into the speed multiplier. If we hit apply, set the tiling to 1 by default, and then hit apply, we can now, again, replicate the effect that we had earlier, right? So This is basically the same kind of effect, but we can also do tiling. So we can stretch the texture, right? We can kind of make the details a little bit smaller, and overall control the shape of our pattern in order to, you know, produce a much more detailed or a more recognizable shape. For this one, for the tiling, something to note is that you always want to use whole numbers for tiling. Like, for example, for tile X, I will only just use whole numbers. And for tiling on the Y-axis, this is usually safer. I still don't do this often, but you can use decimal points on the Y-axis, and usually that's safer, right? So the reason is that if you use a decimal point on the X-axis, what you'll find is that oftentimes it will produce a seam, like this one, right? Or this one. And that happens because typically the seam on the mesh itself is located along the sort of the middle of the mesh in terms of the X-axis seam. And so that's why whenever you use a decimal point on the X-axis, it will more often than not result in a seam somewhere in the middle of your mesh. Whereas the seams for the Y-axis usually is at the ends. So it's usually like up here or down here on the bottom edge or the top edge, or in the case of our sphere of our disc, it's here in the middle and then here at the very outermost edge. And so the seam isn't going to be visible because it's already at the edge, right? So you can kind of stretch this however you want, and it will be safe for the most part on the Y-axis. But on the X-axis, I think it would be best if you avoid using decimal points on the X-axis, just so you're avoiding those weird glitchy seams on your visual effect. So with that, I think this is already pretty good. We could call this done. This is our panner technique, right? So the panning is basic. It really is just like moving the texture along at a certain speed and along whatever axis that you feel like is appropriate for your visual effect. So now you have this one. The next technique that I will show you is the distortion. So with the distortion, what it is basically another kind of offset. It's sort of a cousin of the offset technique, which is if we have a noise driving the offsetting of the pixels on the texture, that is a distortion. So to show that, I'm going to go ahead and select all of the nodes that I have so far, and I'm going to hit Control D to duplicate. And then I'm going to rename all of my parameters. So I'm going to rename this to texture distortion, right? I'm going to rename this as well to texture distortion. And then I'm going to create a multiplier for this particular texture. You know, I'm going to change the noise here as well, just to, you know, be more thorough. And then I'm going to create my multiplier. So I'm going to create a multiply node, plug the red channel of my distortion in there. Then I'm going to create a scalar parameter, and then create a rename this to distortion, intensity. And I'm gonna set that to 0 just so it's neutral, right? And then what I'm gonna do is I'm going to, just like how I did the offsetting before, right? I'm just going to do an add node, and I'm going to add my current main coordinates for my texture, plug that into A, and then my distortion texture, I'm going to plug that into B, and then the add node just goes into the UV. And if I hit apply, it's not going to change anything because my distortion is at 0. But so now what we can do is go over to my master material. I'm going to create a material instance of this, and I'm going to rename it to mi emissive panner 01, right? And then I can go ahead and assign this to both of my meshes. There you go. And if I open this up, go into my material instance here, you can see that I have my distortion intensity and then my different textures, and my texture controls here. They're all set to the most neutral possible values, so it's like 1 1 and 0 0. And the and so now I can start changing these into values that'll suit my visual effect. So for example, the distortion intensity, I can go ahead and give this like a value of like 0.1, and you could see that the textures kind of move, right? If I kind of just scrub along this value, you can see them already begin to change, and distort and warp along the values of my distortion texture. So the black and white values of your distortion texture is going to affect how much the distortion is on your main texture. And it can be, if you're using something with like a purlin that has very smooth values, you're gonna get very subtle and kind of smooth looking distortions. But if you have something that has a lot of micro details, like say this cloud noise, you're going to get a lot of smaller details within your distortion as well. So it's really up to you. It depends on the style that you're looking for. So if you're going for a more stylized look, then maybe you would want to do something like a purlin distort, because this tends to have a more stylized distortion with all the big shapes that it has, a lot of big swoops. But for something that's more realistic, maybe you want to use like a cloud noise, because this will have a lot more micro detail that you can have in there and really push that energy type caustic feel to your visual effect. So it truly depends on what the style you're going for, the concept that you have. But overall, this will be this is the, you can kind of play around and mix and match a lot of these effects. And then from here, I can go ahead and give this a little bit of speed. So I'm gonna give it like speed on the y-axis, right? Maybe not the distortion, but my main texture. I'll do some distortion, some animation there, and you can kind of already see it distorting as it scrolls along. I'm going to give this some stretch, right? And then I'm going to give this some stretch, and then maybe some more tiling on the y-axis or the x-axis, just to have a little bit more detail in there. Same on my distortion there. So I think that's looking really interesting, right? And so now you can kind of see sort of the foundations of our visual effect forming. I'm going to go ahead and go back to my master material and click on two-sided. just so this will have the backward facing side showing as well, just to render that. Keep in mind though that Unreal Engine has a little bit of a bug when it comes to rendering two-sided translucent materials, because more often than not, it's going to cause something like this to happen, which is the engine kind of having trouble deciding which face is the back face and which face is the front face. Because it's translucent, it can kind of see both sides, and so there's some bit of like rendering kind of artifacting going on here. So keep that in mind. If you see that, that's normal. That'll get fixed when we start creating our opacity controls, which at this point we are going to proceed with. So the next issue that I want to fix is the edges, right? So now we want to get rid of the seams. We want the and the seams are just like any kind of sharp edge to your visual effect that makes the shape of the effect obvious, right? So this is obviously a cylinder, and the way you can tell is because there's this edge here, and then there's this edge in the bottom, and then the edges on the sides. Similarly, this is obviously a disc because you can see the circle, and it's flat on the edge, so you can kind of see what this effect was built off of, and we want to hide those as much as we can. So for this one, the first thing I'm going to do is mask out the sides. You have to, once again, be aware of the directions in which your X and Y coordinates are going. And that's because this will dictate which sides you have to mask out. So to start this, I'm going to start with a component, with a texture coordinate once again. And this is just, once again, to just get the directions of my mesh, right? My UV coordinates. And from the texture coordinate, I'm going to go ahead and pull this out and choose a component mask. So what a component mask does is that it basically it isolates a certain channel from the input of that it takes. So as you can see here, it has RGBA and then it has checkboxes. So that means right now it's only outputting the red channel and the green channel of this input, which is useful because for this texture coordinate, this is only a vector 2. So it only has the red and the green channel. So right now the component mask is outputting both of those channels. But if I expand this here by clicking this arrow, you can see that it's outputting, both of the U and V coordinates right now. But if I want to isolate a certain direction, for example, if I want to isolate the horizontal direction, then I will uncheck the green channel and just leave the red. And the red channel is the x-axis. Conversely, the other way around, green channel is the y-axis. So you can kind of see it here by isolating these channels. I can select which direction I want my mask to face. So for now, we'll leave this at green, and I'll even go ahead and right-click my component mask and convert this to parameter. And just say mask direction. And with this one, the next thing I can do if I really want to is start to connect this mask to my main texture. So my main texture, from my main texture here, I'm going to do power node, and then I'm going to use a scalar parameter to connect a parameter to my power. And then I'll just name this main texture power. And I set that to 1. So the most neutral value for power is always 1. Always set your power exponent to 1 by default, just so you're not doing some kind of janky stuff to your textures right off the bat. Then just to illustrate this, I can go ahead and do a multiply and then connect this to my opacity, and then I hit apply, and what you can see is now the top edge and the outer edge on my disk is now being masked out, right? So now we have this gradient fade that we want, and the most simple way to control this now is to have a power node on the mask direction. So on the component mask, I can just go pull this out and do power again. And once again, I could just do like mask power. Right, so I can just do power here, plug this into the multiply like so, and then hit apply. And then if I hit apply and go to my instance, the mask power, if I control this, then I can control how much of my material is getting masked out. The problem comes when you have to have much finer controls, because as you can see, this is going to kind of blanketly eat up your texture. And sometimes you don't want that, because now this is going to kind of kill the emissive entirely, and you're going to have a much harder time controlling the height and coverage of your material. So I'll show you a better way to do this that has more control over the position and the feathering of your material or your mask. And for that, we're gonna do a smooth step. So smooth step is an Unreal function. It takes a value and a minimum and maximum input. And so what we're going to do with just a couple more scalar parameters is to have a minimum, which is sort of the position of the gradient, and a maximum, which will help us calculate the gradient or the feathering. So for this one, I'm going to rename it to, let's say, mask curve. Or, yeah, gradient curve, sorry. We'll do it, gradient curve. And then duplicate that, rename it to gradient feather. And for the smooth step, the formula is pretty simple, right? We're gonna create an add node, and then we're gonna add these two together. So curve to A, feather to B, and then the add goes to the maximum. The curve goes to the minimum, like so. And so this is now what that looks like in terms of the formula. And so now we can plug this into our multiply and hit apply, and it's gonna bring that seam back. But by controlling the curve like so, now we can kind of see how this works, right? So we can control the curve, we can control the position of the seam, and then put in a feather to control how soft that transition is. So as you can see, I have a lot more control with this technique than I would have if I was just using the power node, right? So this is a lot more control. And so I can better fine-tune the details of my visual effect with this node. a thing to keep in mind if you are, if you are going to go with the visual effects, is that this has a little bit more cost. Right now, we're not worried about like performance cost or anything, but if you ever start working on a project, Smooth Step does take up more performance than, say, a power node would. And so if we're particularly concerned about performance, we're not going to be using the Smooth Step. And instead, we'll just maybe use something simpler like power or even linear interpolate. But for our purposes here and for the most sort of visual integrity that we can have, we are going to use the Smooth Step because it just gives us a better result overall. So now this is okay, but the problem is that I can kind of still see the cylinder, right? So here I can still kind of see the disc, and I can see that because I can, I notice, or I can see that it kind of cuts off around this area, right? I can see where the cylinder is because it kind of still cuts off in this area generally. So there's still a bit of a line, even though it's softer. There's still a little bit of a line that I can see. And so to fix that, we are going to add a little bit of noise to this texture, to this mask. To do this, we are going to kind of just grab our distortion block of code here. We're just gonna duplicate it and rename our node. So this one is going to be texture mask, and then rename again. It's important to rename your nodes because if you have two nodes of the same name, then you're just going to keep you're going to use one parameter essentially for two things, which it can be a little bit of a pain to troubleshoot if you don't if you don't like realize it off the bat. Similar to how it works with programming, right? You always want to rename your variables in order to kind of keep them separated. But with that being said, we can go ahead and stick a power node into this texture mask, right? Do another scalar parameter here for the mask power. Hit apply. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the inverse of this direction of this mask, and I'm going to go ahead and pull out this output. I'm gonna type in 1-. So 1- is essentially just inverse. So it's going to flip the mask to the inverse direction. And then I'm going to go ahead and multiply this inverse to my gradient mask. And then I'm going to subtract the result of that to the main mask to kind of give it some shape. So and then this subtract is going to go into the multiply for our texture. So this is going to be, so this is that, right? It can get a little bit confusing. But so now what's happening is I'm taking this texture and I'm multiplying it to the inverse of my mask, and then I'm subtracting that inverse to get a shape on the edge of my gradient here, so that it's a lot less noticeable in terms of the shape. The way that looks if I hit apply is that it's going to give a lot more variation to the shape here, right? Like, so here you could kind of see it's that the shape is now a little bit more varied in terms of the overall silhouette of the mask. And I can even modify that further by applying some more tiling, you know, applying some speed, you know, just to give it a lot more variation. And so now it's a lot less obvious where the edges are on my material. And I can even do, you know, and I can still adjust sort of the gradient of this to be able to create a more, you know, to adjust sort of the range or the coverage of my visual effect. And so that's already working quite well with just this block of material code. Now this can get a little bit messy, right? So we have this going down here and it's going to this particular block of code. With that, just make sure to keep in mind the sort of the neatness of your materials, just so it's readable not just for you but also for other people who might be looking at your materials. Just a little bit of good practice isn't gonna hurt when it comes to writing your material or your code. So there you go. The next thing we're gonna do is now on the cylinder especially, we have two issues left to fix. We have the sides here and the bottom here. And for the sides, what we're going to do is use a Fresnel. So Fresnel is a function in Unreal Engine that's essentially used for most commonly like glass materials. And the reason is because on like cylindrical like glass or bottles, or like drinking glass, or even like spheres or crystal balls, you're gonna notice that on the edges of the glass, the color is a little bit thicker, and that's because there's more material on the edges that you could see, and they're all kind of lined up, and then it kind of feathers out towards the middle. We are going to use that same concept but inverted to fade out the sides of this material. So to illustrate this, I'm going to preview this Fresnel. And so when you preview the Fresnel, this is the base effect that you're going to get, right? And so you can kind of already see here how we are going to mask out the sides of this cylinder, because this white part here is the part that we want to take out. And you could do this by essentially getting the inverse of this Fresnel. So we're gonna do 1 minus again to get the middle. And as you can see, this is already fading out pretty nicely. And kind of doing a smooth step again. So because on the Fresnel itself, you can like fiddle around with the exponent in, and then the base reflect fraction, to kind of blend in the edges of the Fresnel. But for us, we are going to use smooth step just because we have it. We have the option, and again, the smooth step just gives us a lot more control in regards to our material. So same thing as before, we're going to do two scalar parameters: Fresnel curve and Fresnel feather. Sorry. Then we're gonna add both of these together. Add goes into max, curve goes into min, like so. Then multiply. So we multiply the Fresnel smooth step to the main alpha sort of line. Then we're going to plug this into opacity to connect it. I'm gonna stop previewing this and hit apply. And if we go back to our instance, what happens is now we have the Fresnel controls here, and we can control how far in that goes, right? And then we can also control the feathering or the smoothness of that line. And yeah, so we can control the smoothness of that, or the softness of that line, and effectively hide the edges of our cylinder. Keep in mind that this works for anything that is off view, like any vertex that is not facing the camera will be affected by the Fresnel. So so that means our disc here, if I were to view it off angle, like so, you can kind of see it already vanish, right? You can kind of see it already like fade. And that's because the Fresnel is eating it up. The Fresnel is a screen space effect. So it heavily depends on the camera angle that you're viewing the effect at. If you're viewing it at an off angle, then it's going to eat it up, like it's doing right now with the disc. And so this works well with like rounded objects or like completely 3D objects that have multiple sides that you know, that some of them are facing away from the camera. So the Fresnel isn't going to just mask all of it out. But for like flat effects like this disc that we have, this is going to not, the Fresnel isn't going to be great for this particular effect. And so the way to fix this would be to create just a different instance. So I would have Panner 1 and Panner 2, and Panner 2 would just have less, would just disable the Fresnel entirely, right? So that it doesn't eat it up. Oh, sorry, I messed that up. Yeah. So Panner 2 would just have like no Fresnel entirely, just so that it doesn't eat up that particular effect, right? So you can still see this even if the angle is off. It's not going to affect it or change it or do anything like that. The other thing with Fresnel is that it has a weird interaction with two-sided materials, specifically cylinders, because so as you can see here in on my cylinder, it's doing its job, right? It's masking out the sides, but if you ever look at it from above, it's going to mask out, it's going to create a gap here and here. And that's because those two sides, even though it's backwards facing, those two sides are still facing away from the camera, and so the Fresnel is going to eat up the opacity on both of those sides. So you just have to be careful when you're working with the Fresnel. It's going to take a little bit of tweaking to kind of get this right and find a good balance of like, okay, is it okay? Is it masking out enough without masking out too much? Because you never want to mask out too much. You're going to eat up your emissive, and your effect is going to look flat. So just make sure to balance this out. That's the key with any kind of visual effect, is you're always going to need to balance out your values so that it's taking off just right. It's not going to take off too much, because again, that will make your visual effect flat. So now you can kind of see this, right? So we can kind of see how this is going to go together. Right. So this is this is gonna go in there, and then we're gonna have like different there you go, and we're gonna have like different layers of this like overlapping with each other, and it's going to create our portal effect. So so this is going to be sort of the basis of our plate number 2 for our VFX class. So anyway, the last thing that I need to change, the last sort of issue that I need to address when it comes to like seams and stuff is the bottom edge, which is the easiest to address because the bottom edge is usually the edge that intersects with the floor. And so with this particular effect, I'm just going to do a depth fade. So from the main opacity line, I'm going to pull that out and look for depth fade. I'm going to use a scalar parameter, just like with our, with our flare effect, right? Where we use the depth fade to kind of settle out the seams, fade out the seams. This is going to do the same thing for our mesh-based effect. So yeah, just a little bit of depth fade already helps that. We can, give this a little bit more, like 50 maybe. Just like with the Fresnel, if the value on the depth fade is too high, it's going to eat up your effect. So try not to, or try to balance the numbers on the parameter, just so it's not going to make your visual effect flat. On the panner 2, I'm going to just go ahead and disable this so that it's not going to affect it at all when it's lying on the floor like this. And now we have sort of the basis for our material. The only thing that's left here is to have some color controls. So we're gonna have some a vector 3 that I'm going to convert to parameter, and then just color 1. And then you could basically, you have two options here. You could either tint it, which is just like multiply the red channel of our texture. Yeah, you could multiply the red channel of our texture to the RGB channel of the color. Plug this into a divide. Divide this by the eye adaptation, like so. And then plug that into emissive color. Then just choose a color. I think I will just choose white for default. And then from here, you could start coloring, right? You could start coloring this. You could even bump up this color if you want, right? So all depends on the type of effect that you want to achieve. Or you could do a linear interpolate. So if you're going to do a linear interpolate, you could look for lerp. And for this one, you're going to need two sets of colors, right? You need a color, you need an inner color and an outer color. I kind of have these backwards. So the outer color is usually darker because that's the contrast. And the inner color is usually brighter because that's the core. And for this one, you're gonna want a color alpha power. So I'm going to go from my main texture. I'm going to take out the red channel again, and just do another power node. And then from the exponent here, I'm going to do a color power. And so the power is going to go into alpha. The inner color is going to go to B for 1. And outer color is going to go to A for zero. So this is the setup. This plugs into the divide and hit apply. There isn't much of a change there until I start, putting in a color here. So I can, you can create some pretty nice color combinations for your particle effect. And you can adjust as well sort of the thickness of the color. So if I want, for example, my core color to be a lot thinner, I can go ahead and adjust my color power so that I have more volume or more contrast than core color. Or if I want more, core color, I can just adjust my color power to be lower. And so I can kind of play around with my color combinations from here on out. So there you go. This is the main effect. Here we're showing masking effects and erosion, as well as panning and distortion for our visual effect. And these three techniques are going to be vital to your visual effects journey. If you're going to start creating visual effects, these are the three sort of most essential techniques that you are going to use to be able to create effective visual effect. And your assignment is to create this material and apply it to your mesh textures, to your mesh effects. I will be providing you some textures, some noises, so that you could do this demo. And just upload the screenshot on your Big Sky, onto our Big Sky, just so it counts as your attendance. So with that, we're going to close this video, and I will see you guys next session. Okay, bye bye.